The morning had a soft stillness that Emma Harris always found comforting. Portland was covered in a thin layer of fog, and the sound of light rain echoed faintly through her small home. The scent of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the kitchen, mixing with the faint sweetness of vanilla candles she had lit earlier. She liked mornings like this when the world felt slower, quieter, and she could just exist without anyone expecting anything from her. Emma lived alone in a cozy little house with cream-colored walls and a porch filled with plants she often forgot to water. She worked from home as a freelance designer, and though she loved her work, it often kept her isolated. She hadn't realized how quiet life had become until moments like this when the silence grew heavy enough to notice. The kettle clicked, pulling her out of her thoughts. She poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching the soft drizzle outside. The neighborhood was calm, a small collection of homes surrounded by tall trees and narrow streets. Her next-door neighbor, Ryan Cooper, had moved in a few months ago. He was polite, always offered a wave or a small smile when their paths crossed, but they had never talked much. She knew he lived alone too, though she sometimes heard his dog barking through the fence, just as she took her first sip of coffee. A faint knock echoed from the back door. It was a hesitant knock. Not the confident kind of someone who visited often, but the uncertain tap of someone who wasn't sure they should be there. Emma frowned, set down her mug, and walked toward the sound. Through the glass panel of the door, she saw Ryan standing there, his jacket damp from the rain, his brown hair messy from the wind. He was holding a small paper bag, looking unsure of himself. Emma blinked in surprise before unlocking the door. "Ryan, is everything okay?" He smiled, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "Sorry, I didn't mean to just show up. I was getting breakfast and thought you might like these." He lifted the bag, revealing the logo of a local bakery. Emma hesitated for a moment, touched by the gesture. "That's really kind of you. Come in before you get soaked." Ryan stepped inside, wiping his shoes at the door. The rain had darkened his jacket and left drops clinging to his sleeves. He placed the bag on the counter, glancing around the warm, softly lit kitchen. "You've got a nice place," he said quietly. "Thanks," Emma replied, smiling as she opened the bag. Inside were 2 fresh croissants and a small container of strawberry jam. "These look amazing." "You didn't have to do that," he shrugged. "It's nothing, really. I just figured neighbors should look out for each other." His tone was simple, but there was a quiet sincerity in it. Emma felt something warm in her chest. Not romantic exactly, but something close to comfort. She hadn't realized how long it had been since someone had done something thoughtful for her. "Coffee?" she asked. Ryan nodded. "If you don't mind." As she poured 2 mugs, the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was gentle, like a calm pause that didn't need filling. Ryan sat at the small table near the window while she set down the cups. Outside, the rain fell steadily, tapping against the glass in soft rhythm. "So," she said after a moment, "how are you finding the neighborhood?" "It's quiet," he said with a faint smile. "Peaceful. I like it. Moved here to get away from the city noise?" "Needed a change." Emma nodded. "I get that. I used to live downtown too. It's exciting at first, but after a while, the noise starts to feel like it's echoing inside your head." He chuckled softly. "Exactly that." They talked a little about work, his job in construction, her freelance projects, and about the small things that made life easier or harder. Nothing too deep, but something about the simplicity of it made the moment feel human. It had been a long time since Emma had shared a morning like this with anyone. Then, as the conversation quieted again, she noticed Ryan looking toward the window, lost in thought. "You okay?" she asked gently. He nodded, though his smile was faint. "Yeah, just thinking. It's strange how mornings can make you remember things you thought you'd forgotten." Emma tilted her head. "Like what?" Ryan hesitated, his gaze still on the window. "I guess people. Times when things felt easier." He gave a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "Sorry, that probably sounds strange." "Not at all," she said. "I think everyone has those mornings." Their eyes met for a brief moment. One of those quiet connections that didn't need words. It wasn't intense or romantic yet, just two people recognizing the same kind of loneliness in each other. Emma decided to lighten the moment. "So, do you bring breakfast to all your neighbors, or should I feel special?" she teased. Ryan smiled, a genuine one this time. "Just you. The others might not share their coffee." She laughed softly, and he joined in. For a moment, the kitchen felt brighter, as if the sound of their laughter chased away the gray outside. Time passed without either of them noticing. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and the clouds began to thin. When Ryan finally stood to leave, Emma realized she didn't want the moment to end. "Thanks again for the croissants," she said as he reached for the door. "You made my quiet morning a little less quiet." He looked back, eyes warm. "Then I guess it was worth getting a little wet." Emma smiled as he stepped out into the soft rain, the door closing gently behind him. For a while she just stood there, listening to the fading sound of his footsteps. The kitchen felt different now, not empty, but full in a quiet way. She looked at the two empty cups on the table, still warm from their conversation, and wondered why a simple visit from a neighbor had stirred something so unexpected inside her. She told herself it was just kindness, just a friendly gesture. But as she picked up the mugs and rinsed them in the sink, she couldn't shake the memory of the way he had looked at her, calm, curious. Almost like he had been carrying a story he hadn't told yet outside. The rain stopped completely, and a soft ray of sunlight slipped through the clouds, landing across the counter where the paper bag still sat. Emma touched it absent-mindedly, smiling to herself. For the first time in a long while, she felt something stir, a gentle reminder that even quiet lives can change in the smallest of moments. She didn't know it yet, but this morning, with its simple rain and shared coffee, it's only the beginning of something she hadn't expected. And as she turned back to her desk to start work, she found herself glancing once more at the door, wondering if he might knock again someday. Asterisk. The next morning came with the same gray clouds and the same soft drizzle against the windows. Emma Harris sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, pretending to work. But her thoughts kept drifting back to yesterday, to the unexpected visit. The smell of rain on Ryan's jacket, and the quiet comfort that filled the kitchen while they talked. She didn't know why she couldn't stop thinking about it. Maybe it was the surprise of being seen after so long. For years, Emma had been used to her quiet routine. Wake up, work, cook dinner, watch something mindless, go to bed. She had built a life that looked peaceful on the outside but felt a little too empty inside. Ryan's visit had broken that stillness. Even if just for a moment, around mid-morning, she noticed movement through the window. Ryan was outside, walking his golden retriever, Charlie. The dog wagged its tail when it saw her, and she smiled. A moment later, Ryan looked up and waved. She waved back, her heart beating faster for reasons she didn't quite understand. A few minutes later, there was another knock at her back door. Emma didn't even need to check who it was. When she opened it, Ryan was standing there again, same easy smile. Oh, his eyes looked a little tired. "Morning," he said. Charlie insisted on saying hi. "I think he remembers your croissants." Emma laughed. "Well, I can't say no to a dog visit. Come in." Ryan stepped inside, brushing off his jacket. Charlie trotted in, sniffing around the kitchen like he owned the place. Emma poured coffee without asking. Somehow it already felt natural. They sat down at the table again, the same spots as before. For a moment, they both just listened to the soft sound of rain outside. It was the kind of silence that didn't need filling. But this time Ryan was the first to speak. "It's been a long week," he said, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "Work's been tough. Deadlines, pressure, you know how it goes." Emma nodded. "Yeah, freelancing has its own kind of stress. You get to work from home, but you also start talking to yourself just to hear a voice." He smiled faintly. "You're not the only one. I catch myself talking to Charlie like he's my roommate." Emma laughed, and for a moment it felt like the rain outside faded away. There was an ease in talking to him, the kind that didn't happen often. They began to talk more freely about work, favorite foods, old movies. Ryan told her about growing up in a small town, about his mother's garden, and how he missed the smell of fresh-cut grass after summer rain. Emma shared little things too, how she once wanted to be an artist, how she found peace in design, and how life didn't always turn out how she imagined. At one point, Ryan went quiet, staring into his cup. His expression shifted slightly, softer now. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said quietly. Emma tilted her head. "Someone from before you moved here." He nodded. "Yeah, a friend. She had the same calm energy as you. Always made people feel like everything was going to be okay, even when things weren't." Emma smiled gently. "That's a nice thing to say. What happened to her?" Ryan sighed, his fingers tapping lightly against the cup. "She moved away. We lost touch. I guess I didn't realize how much I cared until after she was gone." There was a weight in his words. Not regret exactly, but something close. Emma understood that feeling all too well. She'd had people like that in her life, ones who slipped away because she never said what she wanted to. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "It's hard when someone leaves like that." He nodded, eyes distant. "Yeah, sometimes I wonder if she ever thinks about me. But life moves on, right?" Emma looked at him for a long moment, wanting to say something but not sure what. She didn't know Ryan well, but she could tell he was someone who carried his feelings quietly. The kind of person who looked calm on the outside but had whole storms inside to ease the heaviness. She smiled and said, "Well, at least now you have a neighbor who can share croissants and coffee. That's gotta count for something." That made him laugh. A real one this time. "It does. More than you think." They spent the next hour talking about little things again, about the strange neighbor down the street, who decorated his lawn with plastic flamingos, about Charlie's obsession with chasing leaves, and about Emma's failed attempt to keep a houseplant alive for more than a month. There was something comforting in how natural it felt. Emma hadn't realized how much she missed conversation, real conversation, the kind that made you forget the clock was moving as the rain slowed. A faint beam of sunlight broke through the clouds. The kitchen looked warmer suddenly, softer. Ryan leaned back in his chair and let out a quiet breath. "This is nice," he said. "Just sitting here?" Emma nodded. "It is." He hesitated for a moment, then said, "You ever feel like you spend so much time being fine that you forget what it's like to actually feel something?" The question caught her off guard. It wasn't something she expected from a neighbor she barely knew, but it was the kind of question that stuck. She thought for a moment before answering. "Yeah," she said finally. "I think we all do that. We tell ourselves we're okay even when we're not. It's easier than admitting something's missing." Ryan looked at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Maybe understanding, maybe something deeper. "Exactly," he said quietly. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy in a different way, like both of them were thinking about the same kind of emptiness, the same quiet spaces they tried to fill with work, routine, and noise. Emma got up to pour more coffee, but her hand trembled slightly as she set the pot down. She didn't know why his words affected her so much. Maybe because they felt too close to her own truth. When she turned back, Ryan was watching her, not in a way that made her nervous, but in a way that felt sincere, as if he was trying to read something in her expression. She looked away quickly, clearing her throat. "You should take some of these croissants for later," she said. He smiled. "Only if you promise to share coffee again tomorrow." Oh. Emma froze for a second, then smiled back. "We'll see." He laughed softly and stood up, putting on his jacket. Charlie barked from the corner, as if reminding him it was time to go. As Ryan opened the door, he turned back for a moment. "Thanks, Emma, for the company. I didn't realize how much I needed that." "Any time," she said. "It was nice having you here." When he left, the kitchen fell silent again. But this time, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt different, full of something new, something she didn't have a name for yet. Emma sat back down, her coffee growing cold, and smiled to herself. She didn't know where this connection was going, but for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid to find out. Outside, the clouds began to break apart, and a thin line of sunlight fell across her table, like a quiet promise that change had already begun. The storm came without warning that evening. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, swallowing the pale sky and casting a deep gray over the neighborhood. Emma Harris stood by her kitchen window, watching raindrops race down the glass. The steady patter of rain filled the silence inside her home. It was peaceful, yet oddly heavy, like the air before a confession. She had spent the afternoon trying to work, but her focus kept drifting back to Ryan. Their conversation from that morning had stayed with her. It's the way he spoke about his past. The quiet honesty in his voice and the sadness that lingered behind his smile. It had been a long time since anyone's presence had stayed with her like that. When the thunder rumbled, Emma turned off her laptop and decided to make tea. She was halfway through boiling water when a sudden knock made her jump. It wasn't gentle, it was quick, firm, and urgent. Her heart skipped. For a moment she thought it might be the storm rattling something loose. But then she heard it again. She walked to the back door, peering through the glass. Ryan stood outside, soaked from the rain, his jacket dripping and hair plastered to his forehead. He looked like he'd walked through the storm just to get there. "Ryan?" she said as she opened the door. "What are you doing out in this weather?" He gave a small, breathless laugh. "Sorry, my power went out and I didn't feel like sitting alone in the dark." "Come in," she said quickly. "You're freezing." Ryan stepped inside, water pooling at his feet. Emma grabbed a towel from the counter and handed it to him. He smiled gratefully, rubbing his hair dry. "You're a lifesaver," he said. "Sit down," she said, moving to pour tea. "You look like you could use something warm." As the kettle whistled, the kitchen lights flickered. The storm outside grew louder, wind rushing, trees bending. The thunder rolled again, closer this time. When the lights dimmed completely for a second, Ryan instinctively reached for the counter to steady himself. "You okay?" Emma asked. He nodded, a little embarrassed. "Yeah, just. Storms bring back weird memories." She handed him the tea and sat across from him. The candle she had lit earlier now flickered between them, small flame dancing against the darkened room. "What kind of memories?" she asked softly. He hesitated, staring into the steam rising from his cup. "When I was a kid, my dad used to travel a lot. Every time there was a storm, my mom would make us sit in the kitchen with candles. She'd tell stories to distract me from being scared." "That sounds kind of nice," Emma said. He smiled faintly. "It was until she got sick. After that, the house was just quiet during storms. I think that's when I stopped liking the silence." Emma's heart softened. There was something raw in the way he said it. Not self-pity, just truth. "I get that," she said. "Silence can feel heavy when you've lost something." Ryan looked up at her, his eyes meeting hers in the dim light. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Exactly." The thunder cracked again, shaking the window. Emma flinched, and Ryan instinctively reached across the table, touching her hand. It was a small, unplanned gesture, gentle but grounding. Their eyes met again, and neither of them moved for a few seconds. Something shifted in that moment. It wasn't loud or obvious, but real. A quiet recognition that both of them had been carrying loneliness far too long. Emma finally looked away, pulling her hand back slowly. "Sorry," she murmured. "Don't be," Ryan said softly. "It's okay." They sat there for a while, listening to the rain. The power flickered once more, and the room grew darker except for the soft orange glow from the candle. The air felt warmer now, though neither of them said much. After a few minutes, Ryan spoke again. "Can I ask you something?" Emma looked up. "Sure." He leaned forward slightly. "Do you ever feel like some people come into your life just to remind you of what you've been missing?" Her heart tightened. The question was unexpected, and yet it made perfect sense. She could see it in his eyes, the sincerity, the vulnerability. He wasn't trying to flirt. He was speaking from somewhere real, I think, she said after a pause. "Sometimes people show up when we need them most, even if we don't understand why at first." Ryan smiled faintly. "That's what scares me." She frowned slightly. "Scares you?" He nodded. "Because I can already feel it happening." The words hung in the air like something fragile, something that could break if either of them moved too quickly. Emma didn't know what to say. Her chest tightened and her breath came a little slower. She hadn't felt this kind of pull toward someone in a long time. Before she could respond, lightning flashed outside, followed by a deep crack of thunder. The lights flickered again and then went out completely. The room plunged into darkness. For a moment, all they could hear was the rain and their own breathing. Emma found the candle and lifted it slightly, the warm glow catching Ryan's face. He looked calm, though his eyes carried something deep, something she wasn't sure she was ready to name. "I guess that's our cue to sit tight," she said softly, trying to steady her voice. He chuckled. "Guess so." They sat close to the candle, talking quietly. The conversation wandered from childhood memories to favorite books to the strange comfort of rainy days. Every once in a while, their hands brushed as they reached for their cups. Each time, Emma felt a quiet spark that made her chest ache in the best way. The storm slowly began to fade. The thunder grew distant, the rain softened, and the lights flickered back on with a faint hum. The moment broke like waking from a dream. P. Ryan looked around, then at his phone. "Looks like the power's back at my place too," he said. He stood, hesitating near the door. "I should head home before it starts again." Emma nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yeah, of course." He gave her a small, grateful smile. "Thanks for the tea. And for the company. You made tonight a lot less lonely." "You're welcome," she said quietly. As he opened the door, the cool night air swept in, carrying the scent of wet earth. He paused for a moment, turning back. "Emma," he said softly, "I don't know what this is between us, but I'm glad it's here." Before she could reply, he gave her a small nod and disappeared into the night, the sound of his footsteps fading into the damp street. Emma stood there long after he was gone. The candle still flickered, its flame trembling in the draught. She touched the edge of her cup, now cold, and felt a quiet ache in her chest, not sadness, but something gentler. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. Someone had seen her, really seen her, and that changed everything. Outside, the rain eased into a soft mist. Inside, her kitchen felt different, warmer somehow, as if the silence had learned how to breathe again. And though Emma didn't know what the next day would bring, she knew one thing for sure. Something had begun that night, something neither of them had planned. But both of them needed asterisk. The morning after the storm was strangely quiet. The sky was washed clean, pale blue stretching endlessly over the neighborhood. The streets shimmered with puddles, and the smell of wet grass drifted through the open window. Emma Harris sat in her kitchen, staring at the half-empty cup of coffee in front of her. The night before replayed in her mind, the rain, the candlelight, Ryan's words. "Because I can already feel it happening." She couldn't stop hearing it. She told herself it didn't mean anything. Maybe he'd just been caught up in the moment, in the quiet of the storm. But deep down, she knew it had been real. There had been something honest in his eyes, something that matched the ache she'd felt inside her own chest. She tried to focus on work, but every few minutes her thoughts drifted. The hum of her computer couldn't drown out the silence. Everything felt different, like her house had held on to the warmth of his presence by afternoon. The sky turned soft and golden. Emma stepped outside to water her plants, more for distraction than anything. Across the fence, she spotted Ryan on his porch. He was sitting on the steps, phone in hand, staring at something on the screen. He looked thoughtful, maybe even nervous. When he noticed her, he smiled faintly and lifted a hand. She waved back, her stomach tightening. A few minutes later, she heard footsteps on her porch. When she turned, Ryan stood there, holding a folded piece of paper. "Hey," he said quietly. "Do you have a minute?" Emma nodded. "Of course." "Come in." He followed her into the kitchen, setting the paper on the counter, but not opening it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt charged, heavy with things left unsaid. "I didn't sleep much last night," Ryan admitted. "I kept thinking about what I said during the storm." Emma's heart beat faster. "You don't have to explain." "I do," he interrupted gently. "Because I meant it." She froze, eyes meeting his. He looked nervous, but sincere. like someone stepping carefully through something fragile. Ryan took a slow breath. When I moved here, I was trying to start over. I'd gone through a breakup, one of those messy, painful ones that make you question everything. I told myself I was fine, that I didn't need anyone. But I think that was just fear talking. Emma listened silently, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. He continued, voice softer now. Then I met you, and somehow this quiet house that used to feel empty suddenly felt alive again. You made simple things, coffee, rain, a walk outside, feel meaningful. He looked down, then back up at her. I don't know what this is, Emma. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that being around you feels like a second chance. His words hung in the air, gentle, honest, and unexpected. Emma didn't know what to say. She hadn't expected this, not from the man who barely spoke more than a wave when he first moved in. But now every word he said felt like it carried weight. She took a slow breath, trying to steady her thoughts. Ryan, she said softly, that's a lot to say, and I appreciate it. But I don't want you to regret being honest. He shook his head. I won't. I've spent too much of my life keeping quiet about how I feel. I promised myself I'd stop doing that. There was a long pause. The only sound was the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. Finally, Emma smiled, small, genuine. You've caught me off guard, she admitted. I wasn't expecting any of this. But I'm glad you told me. He looked at her, hopeful. So, what does that mean? She hesitated, her heart full but uncertain. It means I care about you too. But I think we both need to take things slow. Whatever this is, it deserves to grow naturally. Ryan's expression softened. Slow sounds perfect. The tension broke with a shared smile. Quiet, relieved, real. He reached for the paper he had brought. I almost didn't give you this, he said, handing it to her. It's nothing serious, just a list of my favorite books and movies. You said you needed recommendations. Emma laughed softly as she unfolded it. His handwriting was messy, but neat enough to read. She scanned the titles and grinned. Half of these are sad stories. Yeah, he said with a small chuckle. Guess I've always liked stories that feel real. Well, she said, folding the paper carefully. Maybe next time we pick something a little lighter. He smiled. Deal. They talked for a while longer about movies, about the storm, about nothing and everything. The conversation flowed easily, filled with pauses that didn't need filling. When Ryan finally stood to leave, the sky outside was painted with orange light. He lingered by the door, looking at her with the same quiet warmth he always did. Thank you, he said. For what? She asked. For not pushing me away, he said. For letting me be honest. Emma smiled. Honesty's rare these days. I think it deserves a chance. He nodded, that faint smile returning. See you tomorrow? Maybe, she said playfully. If Charlie behaves. He laughed, shaking his head as he stepped outside. No promises. She watched him walk down the path, the sunlight catching in his hair. When he disappeared behind his fence, she closed the door, leaning against it for a moment. Her heart felt full, not in the dizzy way of falling too fast, but in the calm way of finally being seen. Later that evening, Emma sat by the window, the paper still in her hand. She read through his list again, smiling at the notes he'd written beside some titles. Small thoughts, tiny details that made her feel closer to him. She didn't know where this connection would go. But she wasn't afraid of it anymore. The rain started again, soft and steady. She made another cup of coffee and let the sound fill the house. It didn't feel lonely now. It felt alive, as she looked out at Ryan's porch light glowing through the mist. She whispered to herself, maybe some people don't walk into your life by accident. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, not loud or frightening this time. Just a reminder of the night that had changed everything. Emma smiled, set the paper on the table, and turned off the light. The house was quiet, but it was no longer empty. Some beginnings don't need promises or labels. Sometimes they start with something as simple as a knock on the door, and a few words you never expected to hear.